in solidarity with those who feel the very real vulnerability arising from the threatening rhetoric of the day. I think of this remembering the symbolic power of an action taken just days after the terrorist attacks in Paris in November 2015, when public protests were banned. 10,000 pairs of shoes were lined up in the Place de la République. Shoes from Pope Francis, shoes from the Dalai Lama, shoes of the living and shoes of the dead. They stood in for the 200,000 people anticipated to gather on Paris streets ahead of the climate summit. So sure, take to the streets, sign petitions, call legislators, move to a red state or stay in one, and run for the school board. Do not go to Canada. Donate to organizations that work on the local level or promote human rights. Think of the great spirit of inventiveness the earth calls forth after every major disturbance it suffers. Be artful, inventive, and just, my friends, but do not be silent.
My name is Andrea Avery. I'm going to read some passages from Nancy Mayer's book, Waist High in the World. She was a very important and personally inspiring voice to me. We lost her in the Grim Reaper year, 2016. But I know some of her friends are in the audience, and I hope these words mean as much to all of you as they do to me. Without explicit invitation, I have no right to enter your home, which has, by long-standing tradition, been assigned a figurative moat, drawbridge, and portcullis in case I forget myself. But I ought to be admitted to any place to which the general populace commonly has access. Restaurants, surely, as well as banks, churches, theaters, and cinemas, the post office, dry cleaning shops, beauty salons, and above all, the mall. You'd think that a capitalist society would eagerly grasp this principle without legal intervention. The more goods and services I can readily reach, the more likely I am to spend my money. In reality, legislation has often been required to ensure access, which has been slow to be established and is still far from perfect. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, of 1990, federally mandating equal opportunity for people with physical and mental impairments, has only begun to have some discernible effects. If I'm to make my contribution to capitalism, of course, I must have some money of my own to spend. According to one magazine article, a staggering 67% of the 43 million Americans with disabilities are unemployed, and 82% of those individuals want to work rather than live on the dole. Employment was one of the major issues ADA was designed to address. It requires employers to hire qualified personnel without regard to disability and to make modifications as long as those do not impose undue hardship to accommodate their special needs. Employers balk mechanically at mandates, as a friend from high school who owns his own business made clear one evening, claiming that such a law threatened to bankrupt him. He didn't even fall under its provisions, I had to point out to him, since he had fewer than the 25 employees originally required for it to take force, or even the 15 to which the limit has now been lowered. And the undue hardship clause protects businesses from unreasonable levels of expense. Moreover, many modifications, a ramp to a door, say, don't cost a great deal, but if done properly, last virtually forever, so that my friend himself, should he suffer a stroke years hence, might benefit from work done now. My great concern, I'm skipping around, you all should read this book. My great concern is that in an era when peevish voters press for a different quick fix with every election, unnerved legislators will jettison the Americans with Disabilities Act long before the new conditions and mandates can work more than superficial change in either the lives of the disabled or the attitudes of the non-disabled. Directives are essential until the standards they put into place come to seem so natural that behaviors are permanently altered. But such transformation is not going to occur in the couple of years between national elections, when one set of bums gets thrown out and another set sweeps in, promising to reverse whatever their predecessors put into place. Currently, governmental protection of the powerless is unfashionable, and in the tempestuous drive to get rid of big government, I can well imagine Congress proudly pitching ADA overboard. I remember reading a passage in which William F. Buckley Jr., describing a visit to his mother, commented how sweet she always smelled, despite her deterioration in old age, and snapping to myself, of course she smells sweet. A nurse looks after her 24 hours a day. Put her in a county nursing home for a week and see how sweet she smells. Power and privilege dangerously insulate policymakers from the real needs of their constituents. One day, it may seem as silly to build a structure without a ramp as it would be to leave off a set of steps today, but at the moment people must be told to do so, or they'll simply forget. Legislation like ADA, designed to establish the civil rights of a population hitherto assumed to be a little less than kin, must counter centuries of habitual neglect, exclusion, and worse. Only half a century ago, after all, physical and mental defectives were exterminated in Nazi Germany alongside homosexuals and Jews. Historically, the treatment of the disabled has generally stopped short, by at least a couple of inches, of outright atrocity. And most people in the United States would protest against the torture and killing of a young mentally retarded woman, although if she were instead raped by a group of high school students, at least some would rationalize that boys will be boys. And anyway, she asked for it and even liked it. Why even bring up the subject of monstrosity, my husband asks, when I condemn Nazi efforts to purge the state of people with physical and mental defects? No one will disagree with you there. He's right, I hope. At least, I would not expect anyone I'm likely to meet to view medical experimentation without consent, forced sterilization, or the slaughter of innocents, or any of the rest of us for that matter, as anything but unconscionable violations of human rights. In this sense, I am not looking for argument, I assure you. But I would expect, because I regularly encounter the sort of socially hygienic attitudes toward people with disabilities that might have permitted otherwise compassionate human beings to acquiesce in, or at least to overlook such desecration of human life. These attitudes may be held, often unawares, by people so well-meaning and unscrupulous, that they would be aghast to have their opinions associated, even tenuously, with the atrocities of an indubitably mad dictator obsessed with the purity of his race. These are my realities, and some of them nearly break my heart. Some of them don't. I will never wield a mop again, after all, or scrub another toilet bowl. My grief is selective. But it is not the world's task to assuage whatever genuine sorrows darken my spirit. I know this. I think most people with disabilities do. In asking that the entrance to a building be ramped, that the numbers on an elevator panel be brailled, that emergency services be equipped to communicate with people who cannot hear or speak clearly, no one expects all impediments to be miraculously whisked away. In insisting that others view our lives as ample and precious, we are not demanding that they be made perfect. There are rewards for making the world physically and emotionally accessible to all people, including benefits that accrue to society as a whole. The more perspectives that can be brought to bear on human experience, even from the slant of a wheelchair or a hospital bed, or through the ears of a blind person or the fingers of someone who is deaf, the richer that experience becomes. If it is both possible and pleasant for me and my kind to enter, the world will become a livelier place. You'll see.
My name is Farid Matuk. It's a Syrian name. A Syrian Peruvian woman and a Peruvian man, a mestizo man. I was born in Lima, Peru, came to the United States in we were undocumented until immigration reform was passed in 1987. We came though because my mother was getting away from domestic abuse. She preemptively kidnapped me so that we could get here. So in that sense, I guess like a lot of us, I'm a refugee from a country that doesn't exist, just a country of women. I need that background to say that I looked for my models in a lot of places. And one of the places where I find that, a model for how to think and also actually how to write poetry, even though she writes in prose, is in the work of the African-American scholar Horton Spillers. I'm going to read two paragraphs from the beginning of this essay from 1987 called Mama's a Baby, Papa's Maybe. Dr. Spillers is writing very specifically from the perspective of an African-American woman. But if our experiences are different in degree, then by some measure of those degrees, or if our experiences are different in kind, then by some overlap of our kind. What she says here speaks to me and I think to a lot of folks. Let's face it, writes Dr. Spillers, I am a marked woman, but not everybody knows my name. Peaches and brown sugar, sapphire and earth mother, auntie, granny, God's holy fool, and Miss Ebony First, or black woman at the podium. I describe a locus of confounded identities, a meeting ground of investments and privations in the national treasury of rhetorical wealth. My country needs me, and if I were not here, I would have to be invented. W.E.B. Du Bois predicted earlier than 1903 that the 20th century would be the century of the color line. We could add to this spatiotemporal configuration another thematic of analogously terrible weight. If the black woman can be seen as a particular figuration of the split subject psychoanalytic theory posits, then Du Bois' century marks the site of its profoundest revelation. The problem before us is deceptively simple. The terms enclosed in quotation marks in the preceding paragraph isolate overdetermined nominative properties. Embedded in bizarre axiological ground, they demonstrate a sort of telegraphic coding. They are markers so loaded with mythical prepossession that there is no easy way for the agents buried beneath them to come clean. In that regard, the names by which I am called in a public place render an example of signifying property plus. In order for me to speak a pure word concerning myself, I must strip down through layers of attenuated meanings made in excess in time, over time, assigned by a particular historical order, and there await marvels of my own inventiveness. The Child Development Group of Mississippi was an early Head Start program. It functioned from 65 to 67, sometimes with federal funding, sometimes not, because it was so controversial. I'm grateful to the poet and scholar Fred Moten who called my attention to this book. There's a biased history of